Dante, because of your sins, your infidelity, and your selfishness, you lost the most precious thing in your life, your beloved Beatrice. Do you want to win her back? It is possible, but you will have to go to a place that exists after their earthly life, where souls are punished upon death, where the worst nightmares become reality, where sins committed are paid with eternal suffering. Good luck, Dante. You will need it. Which are the 9 centric circles of hell?
Let's check them out.
Limbo, home of the virtuous pagans who lived before the time of Christ and were not baptized. They are eternally separated from the grace of the Catholic and Christian God. Lust, souls consumed by sensual desires, are punished tossed around by violent winds, preventing them from finding rest. Gluttony, those who indulge in excessive eating and drinking are plunged into a sea of freezing, pestilent rain under the watchful eye of Cerberus, a 3-headed dog. Greed, souls excessively attached to material possessions, were punished by having large rocks pushed against each other in an endless cycle. Wrath, the wrathful are punished by eternally fighting each other on the surface of the river Styx under the gaze of demons. Heresy, heretics, those who reject Christian doctrine, are condemned to burn in flaming tombs. Violence, violent souls are punished in various ways, including being submerged in boiling blood and fire, or being pursued by Cerberus. Fraud, those who practice deceit and fraud are subject to constant torment, including being whipped by demons or submerged in filth. Betrayal, the deepest circle, reserved for those who betrayed their trust, is a frozen lake where Lucifer, Brutus, and Cassius are most severely punished. Man, all those things sound terrifying. But you know what? Playing with Dante through hell was amazing. Hell, a place that is so popular in society, in the history of humankind, and let's not forget, it's celebrated using audiovisual media, from literary works to cinema, and of course, the world of video games. There are many games set in hell, in the underworld, the pandemonium, the bottomless pit, baby. Games like Doom, Diablo, Shadows of the Damned, Devil May Cry, Hades, Hellblade, Grim Fandango, and many more. But for me, none other than the video game from the studio Visceral Games captures a tangible feeling of the hellish underworld. I'm talking about the forgotten Dante's Inferno, launched in 2010. In this video, I'm going on a personal deep dive, talking about this video game, from its source material to my experience playing this digital adventure. In the early years of the 21st century, a saga dominated the action genre, inspired by literary works as well as mythology. This saga, starring a Spartan warrior seeking revenge against the mythological gods, captivated both fans and newcomers alike. In the action video games, it is a game series that even in the second decade of the century remains alive and popular. God of War and Kratos offered action-packed adventures with a mature, explicit, and serious tone. No one dared to compete with Mr. Kratos. His anger, his rage, his madness, his ferocity kept the competition at bay. But the geniuses at Visceral Games, an American studio also responsible for Dead Space, had the courage and audacity to create a game in the realm solemnly ruled by Kratos. However, Visceral Games didn't aim for something simple, superficial, or populist. Instead, these digital magicians of the studio decided to draw inspiration and base their game on nothing less than a literary masterpiece and legendary that it's so intricate that the resulting video game is worthy of the original material, respecting its proportions. Specifically, the game they chose to create is based on a portion of the literary work of the Italian writer, poet, and philosopher Dante Alighieri. Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy in 1321. It is a narrative poem that expresses a figurative vision of the afterlife. What happens after a human being ceases to exist physically on planet Earth. This poem is considered one of the most important literary works in the Western world, and it helped establish Tuscan as the standard language in Italy. The Divine Comedy is divided into three parts: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso, titles in their original language. The poem depicts the journey of a human soul to the afterlife, proposing a divine justice imposed either as punishment or as a reward. The protagonist of the poem is Dante himself, journeying through hell, purgatory, and heaven or paradise. The poem employs an allegorical narrative, symbolizing the adventure and the soul's journey towards God. It begins with the rejection and acknowledgement of sin in hell, the repentance of the penitent Christian life in purgatory, and the Odyssey ends with the soul's ascent to the celestial realms of paradise. During the Odyssey and the philosophical adventure of the pilgrim Dante through these three symbolic realms, he is accompanied by three guides: Virgil, a character based on the ancient Roman poet who represents human reason and advises Dante during his journey through hell and purgatory; Beatrice, who guides Dante through paradise, representing divine revelation and grace, and symbolizing theology. Beatrice was inspired by a real-life platonic love of Dante's. The real Beatrice was an Italian woman married to a banker, and the final guide in the poetic Odyssey is Bernard of Clairvaux, pardon my French, who embodies contemplative mysticism as well as a devotion to the Virgin Mary. Bernard was a French Cistercian monk, a member of the Catholic monastic order who had a significant influence on the political and religious life of the 12th century Europe. The poem begins on the night before Holy Thursday, during what is now the Holy Week in the year 1300. Dante, a 30-year-old pilgrim, finds himself lost in a gloomy, dark, and dangerous forest. He is surrounded by a lion, a leopard, and a human she-wolf. Dante is also, mentally speaking, unable to find the right path, the path to salvation. Dante feels his decline intensely, his descent into a desolate, hopeless, and irreversible place. At this lowest point in his life, Virgil, like a true superhero, arrives and saves him. It is then that he and his guide begin their odyssey through the underworld. As we can see in this poem, each punishment is symbolized by levels of poetic justice. An archetype of this poetic law is the fortune teller and orator, who in hell must walk with their heads backwards, unable to see what lies before them, clearly demonstrating what they practice in life. In the Divine Comedy, hell allegorically represents the true image of sins as seen by the Christian soul. For example, the beasts of the lion, the leopard, and she-wolf symbolize self-indulgence, violence, and wickedness. These sins also divide the three main parts of Dante's Inferno. The upper circle, where the four most indulgent sins are lust, gluttony, avarice, and wrath. Then comes the seventh circle, which is not the lucky number 7. In this section recites the sins of violence towards one's neighbor, violence towards oneself, and violence towards God, art, and nature. The 8th and 9th circles of hell house the sins of fraud and the sin of betrayal. There are two special spiritual realms. In the first circle is limbo, which includes virtuous pagans who were not sinners, but they ignored Christ. And very similarly, in the 6th circle, heretics are placed for contradicting and confusing the Spirit of Christ. As is popularly known, after his passage through hell, Dante travels through purgatory and paradise. But since the 2010 video game Dante's Inferno by Visceral Games and Electronic Arts is loosely based only on the hell portion of Dante's Alighieri's poem, I will not elaborate on the purgatory or paradise sections. If that was the case, this video will be 10 hours. Enough is enough. The poet Dante drew inspiration from the writing style of Virgil, the ancient Roman poet. Lucan, another Roman poet of Hispanic origin, famous for his work Pharsalia, also from Ovid, yet another Roman poet, known for his Ars Amatoria and Metamorphoses. And finally, Statius, a Neapolitan poet highly acclaimed in his time. Unfortunately, Dante did not have access to the works of Homer, which is why his inspiration came from Italian poets. However, Dante did have one crucial figure who was the foundation of his poem, Aristotle. the Greek philosopher, polymath, and scientist, who, along with Plato, is considered the father of Western philosophy. Dante learned from Aristotle through accounts by the German bishop Albertus Magnus. So strong is Aristotle's influence on Dante's Divine Comedy that Virgil quotes Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, a work on ethics, morality, and Western philosophy. He also draws on Cicero's De Officiis, a work about the duties a man must uphold upon belonging to any state. Virgil uses De Officiis to explain why intellectual sins are worse than violent sins. A compelling narrative at the end of the Inferno section of the poem. This poem by Dante was lost during the Enlightenment, a European cultural and intellectual movement during the 18th and early 19th centuries. It was rediscovered in the English-speaking world by the English poet William Blake. And according to the renowned Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges, The Divine Comedy is the greatest book that literature has ever produced. Dante Alighieri is considered one of the greatest writers, on par with Shakespeare, Cervantes, and Melville. The Divine Comedy has been used in popular culture in countless audiovisual works, from films like Seven from 1995, starring Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman, and directed by David Fincher, to music, television, comics, and of course, video games, such as Dante's Inferno from 2010 for the PlayStation 3, PC, and Xbox 360.
Who comes into my house of pain?
One who loves Beatrice! Tell me where to find her!
I'm well acquainted with your sins! Lust! Gluttony! Greed! Anger! Heresy! Violence! Fraud! Treachery!
The video game alters many narrative aspects of the original literary work. The most significant change is that of Dantes himself, who in this video game version goes from being a simple pilgrim to an imposing, brave, and courageous Templar knight, perfectly suited to an action game. The story in the game begins after the brutal Battle of Acre, where the Templars in the Third Crusade achieved a great victory against Saladin's armies. In this war, Dante, besides surviving a Saracen assassin, battles the indomitable warrior, the almighty Death, who informs him that he is condemned to hell for all his sins. But this scoundrel refuses to accept the sentence and confronts Death face to face with his sharp, elongated scythe. Dante emerges victorious, defeating Death, and as a bonus, taking the weapon so symbolic of the one popularly known as the Grim Reaper. Dante takes the scythe, and he's not going to use it for cutting grass, eh? There, Dante returns to his home in Florence, where he hopes to find and see his beloved Beatrice again. But oh baby, 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 what Dante finds is terror and barbarity before his eyes. Beatrice lay dead on the ground. Dante's beloved had been cruelly murdered, and Beatrice's soul, having made a pact with Lucifer, is condemned to spend eternity in hell. also due to the Templars' infidelities and the breach of his honesty. In other words, he cheated on Beatrice. It is here that Dante begins his pursuit of Lucifer to save his precious Beatrice. The Templar Knight, repentant of his sins, mainly infidelity as an unfaithful dog, infiltrates the 9 circles of hell to try to bring Beatrice's souls back from the fiery Erebus. Dante's Inferno was and still is compared to the God of War franchise for everything: gameplay, genre, mechanics, and for taking classic works for their narrative with creative liberties. And yes, it is obvious, I personally felt right at home. I played the entire God of War saga, and when I controlled Dante in this game, it was instantaneous, bringing back muscle memory and experiences of playing with Kratos. It is very likely that the developers at Visceral Games were inspired by the Santa Monica Studio saga. But in my opinion, they included original aspects that give Visceral Games' title individuality and idiosyncrasy that made it something special for me, alongside the games starring the Spartan warrior. However, this similarity between Dante's Inferno and God of War in 2010 generated mixed opinions. In 2010, Visceral Games' title faced stiff competition from the third God of War game, but God of War 3 director Stig Asmussen praised and was aware of the upcoming release of Dante's Inferno. Asmussen said, I open quotes, "This is my favorite genre of video games. The more games made in this style, the better." Closed quotes. And let's remember Osquitar's wild old saying, "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery." Chef kiss, mwah. What makes Dante's Inferno special for me is its setting based on Dante's Alighieri's poem, the design of the enemies bordering on the forbidden for the general public. And speaking of the style and form of its enemies, characters, and environments, this visual aspect had detractors and criticisms for being grotesque, explicit, blasphemous, and extravagant in its depiction of the scenes as visual representations of what they look like in a tangible form. I completely disagree with these negative judgments of the character designs. I disapprove of the criticisms. They sound puritanical scenes. In my opinion, the game does a dignified job of visually representing what a stroll through the 9 realms of hell will be like. I don't expect the characters in the circle of lust not to act sensually or with hints of extreme libido. That will be contradictory, don't you agree? The game is unique, distinct, and peculiar for being set in such a dark place that has been depicted countless times in many audiovisual media, and the game evokes that feeling of disgust, discomfort, aversion, and revulsion because it's not a trip to a tropical paradise. Dante is traversing hell, carrying a heavy burden of sins on his shoulders. It is a game that, in its time, pushed the boundaries of puritanical social censorship by depicting desires so condemned by the Catholic and Christian religions, enduring considerable criticism. Despite this, it helped push video games to a more mature level, moving them away from the childish and adolescent stigma that for some reason still lingers in public opinion that video games are for children. And that way of thinking about video games, that is blasphemous for me. My experience was amazing. During my journey, following Dante and his guide Virgil, I came to understand how the Templar Knight was a depraved human being, a wretched person, mired in multiple sins. This is ironic, given that Dante himself is a devout religious man consumed by the dogma, yet conveniently ignores it when it suits him. Not very different from many human beings who, after following any religious doctrine, commit acts of violence on a daily basis in the real world. The gameplay is beautiful, although for some reason I ended up only using one or two of many attacks available in Dante's arsenal. I only use the heavy attack and the light projectiles fired from the Celestial Cross towards the end of the game. There are quite a few different attacks, some light and fast, as well as aerial ones, and others that cover great distances since the scythe extends like Goku's power pole. Of course, Dante is capable of devastating combos that no enemy will be able to withstand. They aren't very complicated to execute with the controller. In fact, they are quite simple, which makes them lose their special impact throughout the adventure. Dante can also perform a kind of fatality before delivering the final blows to his enemies. In this situation, the player can choose between absolving the opponents or punishing them for their misbehavior. Depending on the divine justice decision, Dante unlocks new attacks and abilities. It is a typical skill tree, as is common in video games, but it branches out into two paths with different types of unlockable abilities. I lean more towards the punishment path, represented by the color red. I like it more. The fatality animations are better. They look more violent and bloody. Sadly, I didn't like the abilities can be reset during the game. They are permanent, forcing you to play a new adventure from the start to try out all the abilities available in Dante's repertoire. Something I rarely do in video games. I'm the type who completes the main story of a game and moves on. I don't replay or try to achieve 100% completion, so for me it was a little bit annoying. But I did enjoy the combat system up to a point. Towards the end, the dominance of the heavy attacks and powerful combos starts to become repetitive, especially in the Infernal Circle of Fraud, where 10 stages of pure combat are repeated in the same environment, with enemies from other circles. It's like an arena with hordes of enemies. I didn't enjoy this Fraud Circle at all, but perhaps that was the effect the developers wanted to create at the level. Very clever, man! But Dante's Inferno isn't all punches and kicks. There are also platforming sections, jumps across structures, ropes for propulsion, and Tarzan-style swinging. And, as if that weren't enough, the game offers some simple but fun puzzles. The bosses are colossal in size and design. Their physical appearance is synergistically linked to the type of attacks they execute, giving them a distinctive and unforgettable touch. One thing that fascinated me tremendously were the animations that explain the past and actions of the Templar Knight Dante. These cinematics are beautiful, with a style difficult to describe in words. It's as if they were made with some kind of fabric, offering a handcrafted aesthetic that is very pleasing to the eye, contrasting with the violence of the images that the cinematics show. One criticism that crossed the realm of video games and reached the literary world was the change in the narrative of the character Beatrice. Professors from various universities, experts in the study of Dante's Alighieri's poem, expressed their disapproval of portraying Beatrice in the game as the prototypical damsel in distress, like in the Disney films. The most dramatic change was that in the game, Dante saves Beatrice, while in the poem, it is the other way around. Beatrice saves Dante's lost and damned soul. This makes perfect sense, because Dante is a character corrupted by his sins, lost in the realm of evil, and only Beatrice's help offers him hope of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Another controversy, which I find somewhat amusing given how easily anything can offend some organizations in the United States, was Visceral Games' inclusion of an achievement or trophy in the game. Let me explain. By eliminating monsters designed to resemble children, symbolizing infants who died unbaptized, the player earned the Bad Babysitter trophy. This trophy led to an I'm not making this up, by the way, the American Nanny Association demanding that the trophy be replaced because it was offensive to the profession of child care. In the end, nothing came of it, and the controversy remained just a minor incident and a funny anecdote. Sadly, Dante's Inferno wasn't the success Electronic Arts had hoped for. The game wasn't the contender that would have seriously challenged the Kratos franchise. That was a tall order, as God of War was, at the time, the undisputed face of the action-adventure genre in the video game realm. While it didn't reach the level of the Santa Monica Studios saga, Dante's Inferno offered an adventure base of one of humanity's most important literary works. It wasn't a perfect adaptation, but it was sufficient for a video game that pushed the idea that video games aren't just for children, and that attracting a mature audience doesn't require superficially provocative content. Dante's Inferno provokes profound ideas from a work that requires study to fully understand. The franchise could have refined the formula with more installments. At least a sequel, man. But we all know that Electronic Arts, one of the most hated companies for its hyper-capitalist methods, prioritizes profit over creativity. At one point, a sequel was considered and even planned. The game ends on a cliffhanger, suggesting the Templar's night adventures will continue with him climbing Mount Purgatory. But ultimately, that didn't happen. There was speculation about two more sequels, one based in Purgatory and the other on Paradise, and of course based on those parts of the poem. Nevertheless, the decisions that prevented this trilogy were made by the greedy executives at the Electronic Arts. As always, man, greedy, only thinking in one thing and one thing only: money. In the end, my only hope is that Electronic Arts, seeing the success of the Dead Space remake, will be at least encouraged to develop a remake of Dante's Inferno. But looking at EA's current state, they seem more focused on making even more money by recycling games of soccer/football and American football every year and releasing skins for the Apex Legends Battle Royale. Lately, EA has been closing more and more studios under its umbrella, laying off developers and cancelling projects simply to be more productive and fill the pockets of executives who have no idea about art, creativity, imagination, and of course, video games. Furthermore, they are heavily promoting the use of artificial intelligence in their projects, which is a load of rubbish and a lie, all to avoid paying employees and increase profits by creating, in quotes, artificial garbage devoid of any passion or creativity. But hey, there's always the option of playing the original Dante's Inferno, released in 2010, having fun with it, and sparking curiosity about Alighieri's poem. Dante's Inferno, a great game that, in the real world, the franchise was left in the limbo, thanks to Electronic Arts. Okie dokie. Thank you for your time. I wish you the best in life. See you around.